Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-mursaleen. So we're picking up from last session in which we were expounding on some of the verses that Shaykh Ibrahim Niyas radiallahu anhu mentions in Kashf al-Libas, or his removal of confusion. When he's mentioning the ilm al-zawq, the knowledge of tasting, the knowledge of spiritual experience, and he just says, these are some verses. He says, quote, "At this point, allow me to recollect certain verses of the Quran that are relevant to the subject of spiritual experience." So this is just something that he gives in his 6-volume book on mentions in Kashf al-Libas, or his removal of confusion, transcribed later on. When he's mentioning the ilm al-zawq, the knowledge of tasting, the knowledge of spiritual experience, and he just says, these are some verses. He says, quote, "At this point, allow me to recollect certain verses of the Quran that are relevant to the subject of spiritual experience." So this is just something that he so whichever way you turn, there's the face of we talked about mentions in Kashf al-Libas, or his removal of confusion, transcribed later on. When he's mentioning the ilm al-zawq, and that's a verse, of course, in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 115. He also mentions وَهُوَ الْأَوَّلُ وَالْآخِرُ وَالظَّاهِرُ وَالْبَاطِنُ وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ in Surah Al-Hadid, the 57th surah. And we mentioned that Shaykh Ibrahim is mentioning that every being, every creation in existence is either first, last, seen, or unseen. That is the definite article al. It's a expression of complete totality, so that he's all first, all last, all manifest, all seen, all unseen, and that brings him into a discussion of wahdat al-wujud, which we talked about last time. Another ayah that we will mention later on. Let me just get the Arabic so I read it correctly. سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ إِنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. So we will show them our signs on the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that this Quran is the truth, or that He, meaning God, is the real. And we'll talk about that in a subsequent session, because that has to do with knowledge of self, that we said is also important for knowledge of God. Another ayat, of course, that he's using, فَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ, He is with you wherever you are, also in Surah Al-Hadid. And this brings us to a discussion of the theological implications of thinking about, or experiencing the essential being of Allah, and what this means for Tawheed. Of course, Tawheed, the idea of God, of divine oneness, is the most essential doctrine, most essential belief of all of Muslim, for any Muslim. It's said that Allah will forgive anything except associating partners with Him. And this is, of course, the foundation by which Shaykh Ibrahim is really emphasizing the importance of knowing God, importance of having this experience of the divine oneness. Otherwise, there's always some inconsistency or some misunderstanding in your Tawheed, right? When he explains, so in the Riyal Tafsir, his book on the Quran explanation, when he's explaining "Huwa ma'akum aynama kuntum," He's with you wherever you are. He has this interesting conversation, right? He says, concerning this ma'iyah, this withness, the ulama basically divides between the exoteric scholars and the arafin, the arafun billah, the sort of Gnostics, the people who have come to have direct knowledge of God. So he says the scholars, the exoteric knowledge, the ulama have said it means with you in knowledge, meaning God is with you just by his attribute of knowledge, meaning this is an expression that he has knowledge of whatever you're doing. And the Gnostics, with the Arafun, he says, have said it means he is with you, bizatihi, he's with you in his essential being. Right? And various narrations of various, there are variations of this narration, and but it seems that he had a conversation with somebody when he was in Saudi Arabia. So he said, I spoke with a man. He said, does your, is it true that your sheikh says that God is present with you in his essence? Meaning Sheikh Ahmad Tijani, and Sheikh Ibrahim says yes. And he said, well, do you also, the man then asked him, do you also say what your sheikh said? And he said, well, yes, indeed. If Sheikh Ahmad Tijani said it, I also say it. And then the man said, well, you're wrong. No, God is not present in his essence. So this is the conversation. So Sheikh Ibrahim says, starts to question him. Interesting, Adab. He doesn't fly off the handle. He just says, okay. He said, I'm wrong. So let me ask you some questions. And this is an interesting, there's a similar narration where he's in Saudi Arabia, elsewhere, and the man, one of the Saudi ulama says, we're very proud of you, Sheikh Ibrahim. You're bringing so many people to Islam there in West Africa. Your actions would be perfected only if you got people to get away from this Tariqa Tijaniya thing. And if you did that, then you would really be a true da'i, right? You would really be somebody that's calling people to Islam. So Sheikh Ibrahim, in this instance, also, he didn't get, upset. He just said, so tell me then, what is Tariqa Tijaniya? And the man said, well, I don't really know. I don't know anything about it. So then Sheikh Ibrahim says, well, if you're going to speak about Tariqa Tijaniya, tell me who should be the one to talk about it, one who knows the thing he's talking about, or one who doesn't know. And the man said, well, certainly the one who knows the thing should be the one to talk about it. And he said, well, as for me, I know the Tariqa Tijaniya very well. It's just to say, astaghfirullah, to ask forgiveness from Allah, to say prayer upon the Prophet, to make tahrir, to say la ilaha illallah, to express the oneness of God. Tell me, are any of these things that I should advise my fellow Muslims not to do? He said, no, certainly. Those are all things that Muslims should be doing. He said, well, then I cannot tell them to leave Tariqa Tijaniya. So ended that argument. But in this case, he says, so Sheikh Ibrahim now is questioning the man. You said God is not present here in his essence. So he says, what is this with us then? Like, what is here then? The man said, no, these are just the athar, right? The effects of his power. So he says, well, who is it? Is it not he who affected the effects? And the man said, yes, meaning God is the one who is the mu'athir. He is the one that causes the effects, the traces that we're seeing. So Shaykh Ibrahim says, then where did he go? All of this is his effect, and he cannot be transported from one place to another. Right? This is, of course, a fundamental aspect of Orthodox theology, that Allah is not, doesn't have a body like you and I, that he moves from one place to another. Shaykh Ibrahim says, I may do something in one place and go somewhere else, leaving behind my trace, but God is not transported from one place to another. Right? That's unbecoming of his majesty. If these are his effects, where did he go? So the man said, well, then he is with us in knowledge. I told him, is not his knowledge one of his attributes? Right? So Allahu Alim, Alim. So the ilm is one of the knowledge, one of the attributes of God, one of his divine names. So he said, of course, yes, knowledge is one of his attributes. So I said, the attribute cannot separate itself from that which it describes, the mawsuf, sifa, la yufarraq al-mawsuf, right? And if the attribute should depart from that which is described, both the attribute and that which is described become deficient, fasada, right? Are corrupted. If he is with us in knowledge, he is also with us in his essential being, right? So he's basically suggesting that if you say that he's only with us in knowledge, but he himself is not here, then that knowledge is obviously deficient. And then, of course, Allah himself is now separated from his knowledge, because if you are separating the attribute from the essential being itself, then you're actually corrupting both. So when we talk about the attributes of Allah, we recognize that they are also inseparable from the essence, right? They're distinct, but inseparable. So this is actually obviously a complex theological discussion. So Shaykh Ibrahim continues, I told him, and this is in the Tafsir, I told him, among the affected occurrences in this very moment is this very moment in which we are now. And I find it with every single thing in its essence, right? The lahza, a moment in time, and that you're going to find it everywhere, all around the world, with its very essence, right? So our moment, whatever your second is, you can imagine that second is with all of creation in its essence, every moment, in that moment. And Shaykh continues, I'm not saying this day, since we are currently in daylight, while others of us are in nighttime, but I'm speaking of this moment that just happened, which is an occurrence among occurrences. Yeah. And it is with everything in its essence. He says this is from the perspective of aql, from the perspective of reason. As for the perspective of transmission, God says, then will we relate to them with knowledge, for we were not absent, right, in the Quran. And we are closer to him than you, but you do not see. Right? This is the expression of the people who are at the deathbed of their loved one, and they're sitting looking on, but Allah says, I'm closer to him than you, but you don't see us, right? And so Shaykh Hassan Sisi used to say, Allah would not mention seeing in this case, because if Allah is just with the dying person by his attribute of knowledge, then knowledge is not something to be seen or not seen in any case. But Allah is speaking about his essential being, and this is why he says, La yubsirun, they do not see. And so the man said, well, finally, you have corrected my faith for me. This is interesting because he's basically suggesting that the importance of having the correct understanding of Tawheed, meaning that Allah is present, is that the hadra of Allah, as we mentioned last time, is never absent, right? It's only you who are absent from the hadra of Allah. And so this is something that is a theological understanding, a prerequisite for you to understand that that ma'rifah now, the experiential knowledge of that essential being is essential, right? It's essential for you to have an understanding of what is that actual encounter. And actually one of the ways that Shaykh Ibrahim talks about the encounter with the essence of God, the essential being of God, is through the experience of fasting. Alhamdulillah, we're in Ramadan now. We all know that there is very special time. But one of the things that Shaykh Ibrahim said about about fasting and about Ramadan, he says, well, Jannatul Arafin, right? It's the paradise of the believers. What does he mean? Well, he means that this is actually the time when, it's the paradise of the Gnostics. It means that it's a time when those who know God, who want to know God, are more easily for them to have the veils between them and Allah raised, right? So interesting enough, this is a discussion he begins when he's talking about Surah Al-Ghafir and the letters Hamim. And how he gets there, first of all, we already mentioned that Hamim is like the silk of the Quran, right? And that it's to roam in the meadows of paradise is to read the surahs of Hamim. But he also says, well, Hamim is actually the conjunction between the names Ar-Rahman and Muhammad. If you look in the middle of Ar-Rahman, you have Hamim. If you look in the middle of Muhammad, you have Hamim. And so it's an indication then of this, of Allah's great mercy to the Prophet ﷺ. The mercy of Allah is embodied in the Prophet ﷺ. But then he says also another interpretation of Hamim is a reference to the Sahaba themselves, right, to the Prophet's companions. And so that this is something that so he wants now to speak about the benefit of the Prophet's companions. So in doing so, he talks about, he has a narration from Musa, alayhi salam, from Prophet Musa. So I'm reading from the 5th volume here. So, oh Allah, have you ever honored anybody the way you honored me? He said, you chose me and you spoke to me yourself. Allah says in this narration, and by the way, this is a narration we've tracked it from the Ruh al-Bayan, and Ruh al-Bayan is an 18th century Turkish tafsir. It's actually written in Arabic. It's 10 volumes. But he himself, the author of Ruh al-Bayan, is Ismail Haqqi, is known as one of the kutub of his time. He died in about early 1700s. And very interesting figure himself, was sheikh of one of the branches of the Khalwatiyya Sufi order. And the Khalwatiyya Sufi order is, of course, in that order before he got permission from the Prophet ﷺ to have the new order of the Tijaniya. Interestingly enough, Ismail Haqqi was of the opinion, he lived right at the time around at the end of the 17th century. So 1683, as you probably know, is when the Ottoman Empire was defeated at Vienna, and really the decline of the Ottoman Empire starts from there. And during that time, the Ottoman sultans had become very much beholden to an anti-Sufi movement called the Qadazadalites, and they were going around destroying Sufi zawiyas, destroying tombs. They also made it a death penalty to be caught smoking during that time. Not that that's something, obviously, that the Tijaniya also, not the death penalty, but would have also made prohibited to smoke. But during this time, it was this kind of extreme sect, the Qadazadalites, and some researchers later on have sort of made some association between the Qadazadalites and the later so-called Wahhabis. But there was an anti-Sufi movement, and so Ismail Haqqi at the time was this great Sufi sheikh and believed that if the Ottoman Empire did not reestablish its connection to the Sufi orders, and particularly to the respect of the Sufi saints, that they would suffer decline and would go into retrograde, would sort of fall from grace. And so actually what he's saying is actually happening during his own lifetime. And so his book, his Riyad Tafsir his Ruh al-Bayan is really one of the great attempts to collate the Sufi tradition, to bring it all together around the subject of tafsir. So one of the best ways, for example, to access the Arabi's opinions about the Quran is through Ruh al-Bayan. One of the best ways to access kind of Sufi understandings of Fakhruddin al-Razi, to have that all together, is in Ruh al-Bayan. And so Shaykh Ibrahim, he himself really likes this book, or this many volume Tafsir. He quotes from it quite frequently. In the Kashf al-Bas, in the removal of confusion, his early and most significant book. And I think what's interesting is that book has two sections. One is the main text, and then the appendices. The appendices are, of course, half of the entire book. He writes the first section in 1931, and I think he writes the appendices in around 1934, 1935. The reference to Ruh Bayan does not come at all in the first section. So I think we can kind of actually extrapolate that he got his hands on a copy of Ruh Bayan somewhere in between 1931 and 1934. It's clear that even though many of the things that he was talking about in the beginning section of the book were mentioned in Ruh Bayan, he doesn't quote from them, then he quotes from them later. So here you have this Turkish tafsir, Ottoman tafsir, that makes its way into West Africa. By the way, it's also quoted by other Tijani scholars, such as Malik Si, Haj Malik Si radiallahu anhu. And so this was, it's an interesting segment of Islamic intellectual history to find this interchange. And so here you have Shaykh Ibrahim really inspired by Ruh Bayan and giving this narration. Maybe I'll give the narration in Ruh Bayan first, and so you can see how Shaykh Ibrahim adapts it. So Allah says to Moses, according to Ruh Bayan, and the narration goes like this: إن لي عبادا أخرجهم في آخر الزمان وأكرمهم بشهر رمضان. And he continues. So he said, I have servants, Allah says to Moses, that I will bring forth towards the end of time, and I have honored them with Ramadan. I am closer to them than to you. I did indeed speak to you, but between me and you were 70,000 veils. When the community of Muhammad fasts, and their lips turn white and their skin turns yellow, I lift all these veils at the time of breaking their fast. Right? So Shaykh Ibrahim's version, Allah said, yes, there's a community I have honored with the month of Ramadan. I spoke to you behind 70,000 veils, but when this community fasts, I raise the veils from them, and I am closer to them than all things. The breath of the fasting person among them is more pleasant to me than the smell of musk. When the time for breaking the fast draws near, I meet them face to face. The one fasting has two delights. He takes delight in breaking his fast, and he takes delight in meeting his Lord. So there is an encounter at the time of breaking the fast that is special to the one fasting. Moses says, please give this month to my community. Allah said, this is for the community of Muhammad. And so as Sheikh Tijani Sisi, in one of the speeches that he opened Ramadan with this time around, he quotes from the Hadith Qudsi where Allah says, "As-sawmu li wa ana ajzi bi." Right? And fasting is for me, and I am the one who grants its reward. And so Sheikh Tijani Sisi related the explanation here of Shaykh Ibrahim, that he says, and the reward for the Gnostic is that Allah grants himself to the one fasting, right? Bidhati, he gives himself. So, of course, this is an indication then fasting has a very particular importance and is widely narrated in the Tijani tradition and in the Tafsir elsewhere of Shaykh Ibrahim, is that there is this narration of the creation of the Ruh and the Nafs. When the Ruh was created, Allah asked the Ruh, the spirit, who am I? And the Ruh says, you are you, and you are the Lord of the worlds, and I am your humble servant. And Allah created the Nafs, the ego self, the lower self of the human being, says, who am I? The Nafs says, you are you, and I am I. So Allah takes the Nafs fire for 1,000 years, brings it out. Who am I? You are you, I am I. Holds this part of hellfire for 1,000 years. Who am I? I am I, you are you. Allah takes then the sustenance from the ruh, from the nafs, the food and drink from the nafs for half a day. It says to the nafs, who am I? And the nafs says, you are the Lord of the world, and I am the humble servant. And so fasting then is an indication of a method to break the nafs, right? To make the nafs submit to the divine command. And so this then is the only methodology for obtaining ma'rifah, whether it's done through fasting or through other means, is to discipline the self, right? To have annihilation of the self, that the knowledge of God can only happen in the absence of the self, right? And the Shaykh Madjani, he says, enjoy. So what does he mean? Is that when you are setting yourself, as Allah says in the Quran elsewhere, verily there's never been a God more odiously worshipped apart from God than the passion of the shahwa, the passion of humankind. So or the lust obeyed. So the only way then to have the knowledge of God is to have the annihilation of the self, to have knowledge of the self, knowledge of God, and the non-existence of the self. Because if you say that you are worshiping God, then you've actually made a partner to God already, right? You're setting yourself up as something else besides God, and Allah is only known by Himself, right? So, and so that's why people say, when you have ma'rifah, you actually have nothing, right? Because you don't own it. And Allah is only knowing Himself through you. Right? So that's all for today. And next time I will talk more about the different types of knowledge. The three types of knowledge of Allah's essence, the knowledge of Allah's attributes, and the knowledge of Allah's works, because all of them are important. And the knowledge of Allah's essence is, of course, the most highly prized and difficult to obtain because of this incumbency of eradicating or finding extinction of the self in order for the heart to become completely free of anything else, in order to reflect the full essence of God. And that can't happen except that the self dies. And Sufis often quote here, die before you die. This is a tafsir, a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that is considered da'if by many, but still the meaning is correct. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. Until next time.